Okay, now we're going to move into Reconstruction. And it is entirely appropriate that Mr. Crisp and Miss Jenny built this monument to the people of the South that endured the horrors and atrocities of Reconstruction. The Reconstruction Acts were passed in 1867 and 1868, three of them in 1867, one in 1868. They laid out the plan of how the southern states were to be readmitted to the Union. Now, during the whole war, the North and Lincoln had claimed that we were not out of the Union, that we were just in rebellion. Well, after Lincoln was out of the way, then they decided we were out of the Union and that we needed to be controlled by these Reconstruction Acts. So the South was divided into 5 military districts under martial law and governed by military governors. All males, regardless of race, were now able to participate in constitutional conventions that formed new governments in each state. Each new state constitution gave voting rights to all people regardless of race, all males regardless of race. States were required to ratify the 14th Amendment before they could be readmitted to the Union. They removed states' rights and transferred all rights and power to the central government in Washington, D.C. The 9th and 10th Amendments, which are states' rights amendments and so forth, and the rights of the people were basically just voided by the 14th Amendment. They were different factors that took place in Reconstruction that hampered the South. Property confiscation and all. One of the things in the Communist Manifesto, and Sherman particularly, was a believer in that confiscating property and so forth from Southern landowners. But they did that direct confiscation, and then they ran the taxes up so high that people couldn't pay their taxes. They had tax sales, and they took the land away from Southern landowners. Francis Flagg Putney, that Phoebe Putney Hospital, named for his mother. Now, the hospital thing, the money he contributed was a good thing. It was for power and control. They disenfranchised people that had been Confederates, either anybody in the Confederate government, Confederate soldiers, everybody were disenfranchised and could not vote. But of course, then they gave all the voting power to all the black males and so forth. So the Republicans during Reconstruction took control of all the southern state governments and so forth by banning former Confederates from being able to vote. Discriminatory federal budgets and so forth. I can't go into detail on all these things. We'd be here a week, but the budgets and so forth, like for Union veterans and so forth, all kind of different budgets and all that money was kept spent in the North, very little of it in the South. And the freight rates were set so high in the South that industry could not come here and compete and stuff. And it was not until after World War II, when the Roosevelt administration was kind of shamed into changing the freight rates by one of the Georgia governors, that the freight rates were more or less equalized. But before that, the carpetbaggers played us just as long as they could, and they kept the freight rates so high in the South that we couldn't, industry couldn't come here and produce because they couldn't afford to ship it nowhere. Banking regulations and all were extremely biased in favor of the North. Monopoly regulation was very lax. Absentee ownership of land, as I mentioned, taking land away from Southern landowners. Educating illiterate former slaves and putting them in government offices, the state houses, the local courthouses, every position, was filled with blacks, some of them which couldn't even read and write, totally unqualified, to be in a position like that. So this is what they did to us on that. Now, in Reconstruction, when you read Reconstruction in your history books, they talk about two different things. The third part, some of you probably never heard about it. They have totally left this out of the history books. They talk about carpetbaggers. They talk about the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. Well, the third thing that they totally leave out, I had finished college, master's degree and everything. I had never heard of it till about 20 years ago, SCV, during my studies, the Union League. How many of you have never heard of the Union League? Raise your hand. Well, a few of you, but most of you have heard about it. But you see, how many of you ever read about anything about the Union League in any history book you was reading when you or studying when you was in school? It was left out. The Union League was Uncle Sam's terrorist organization. Uh, what they did, these Yankee carpetbaggers came down, and I use the term Yankee now. Everybody understand that everybody that lives up north is not a Yankee. There's a lot of fine, honorable northern people, but a Yankee, that's different. Hillary Clinton is a perfect example of a modern Yankee, arrogant, all the whole long list of things. But everybody that was up north was not a Yankee and is not a Yankee. So I wanted to make that clear. But the Union League, formed by the carpetbaggers all over the South, they would have these elaborate ceremonies with music and fire and so forth. They would indoctrinate former black slaves, into the Union League. And if you had conservative blacks that didn't want to join or take part in this, they would whip them, or sometimes they murdered them. And if you were a black and didn't vote Republican, they would kill you or whip you for that. The blacks doing that to their own people. But the Yankee carpetbaggers in the Union League, Uncle Sam's terrorist organization, they were giving matches out. They were having them to burn white people, Southerners, former Confederates' houses, barns, shooting livestock, poisoning wells, violating women, committing murder, they were fanatical Republicans who wanted to exterminate every Southern man, woman, and child. Parson Brownlow was actually in Tennessee, but he was a scoundrel and a scalawag. Then he was one of the very worst of all, one of the most extremist of all. And you hear about the KKK forming. If there had never been a Union League doing all these atrocities, there would have never been a KKK. And when I talk about the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, I'm not talking about the modern Klan or the Klan that formed back in 1915. I'm talking about only what I say now applies only to the original Klan, 1867 to 1877. It was an honorable police and resistance organization. This Union League terrorism had gotten so bad that a man's wife or daughter dared not even go to town by herself or anything. It had gotten so bad. It's what caused the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. There would have never been a KKK if there had not been a Union League committing all these atrocities. Tennessee Reconstruction Governor Parson William Brownlow, he was a parson. There were several cases in history where some of these preachers and parsons, pastors and so forth, were some of the most evil people you could imagine. And what I'm fixing to read you that Parson Brown is quoted as saying, and he was a newspaper editor. He didn't just say this stuff, he put it in print in the paper. I think you will agree that he was probably about as hateful, fanatic, and radical as a person could get. He wanted to pass a law that any former Confederate could be shot on sight. No trial, no arrest, nothing. Just if you were a former Confederate, if this law was passed, you could just go up and shoot a former Confederate. Nothing illegal about it or whatever. Well, when former Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, found out about this, he let them know that he could raise 40,000 militiamen as a Southern cavalry with the KKK to fight against that. Well, Parson Brownlow and his group decided they didn't want to have to go up against cavalry with Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was, even Sherman said, that he was the most unusual person produced during the whole war by either side, North or South. He was a cavalry genius, and then Forrest had told him that he could, in addition to 40,000 from Tennessee, he could raise 350,000 in the whole South. So, the radicals then decided they better not form that militia group and just start shooting Confederates, like that. But there were some cases where that happened, where they went to people's house. A young man had just got back from the Confederate Army. They'd take him out, shoot him in the woods and so forth like that. No trial, no nothing. Okay, this is what Parson Brownlow had to say. August the 10th, 1865, his editorial shows support for the Union. And just listen to this. If we had the power, we would arm in uniform and federal habiliments, or he's meaning uniforms and so forth, all the fowls of the air, the fishes of the sea, every wolf, panther, catamount, and bear in the mountains of America, every tiger, elephant, and lion in Europe, every rattlesnake and crocodile in the swamps of Florida and South Georgia, every Negro in the Confederate Southern Confederacy, and every devil in hell, and turn them loose against the Confederacy. Nay, we would poison the very air they breathe, the water they drink, and the food they eat. We would convert hell itself into one great torpedo and have it exploded under the very center of the Confederacy. We say put down the rebellion and force rebels to lay down their arms, and if doing so, we have to exterminate from God's green earth and he was, and this stuff here, the information I got about it, there was enough of these scoundrels and scalawags and radicals, fanatics, that he got great applause from saying what I just read. Another example of his speech was directed toward the Confederates, published in 1864. Had we our wish, we would throw hell wide open and place all such beast-like men and officers on an inclined plane at an angle of 45 degrees, grease the plane with hog's lard 6 inches thick with a wicket at the bottom, and send them as one stream of traitors, robbers, and assassins into the hottest part of the internal regions of hell. How do you get more radical and fanatics than that? But that was what, they were people that wanted to do this to the South. Even when before the war ended, Sherman, before in the Atlanta campaign, he wrote to his wife and he said, that it's not just the Confederate Army, we're planning on extermination of men, women, and children. So, you had radicals that were so extremist that they wanted to do these kind of things to us. So after just reading that, what these kind of people wanted to do to us, that should explain to you why the Ku Klux Klan was necessary. And several of these articles we passed out to you, will give a lot more details about that. But, the second Klan came into being starting in 1915. And of course, there's a modern Klan now, and I don't take up for any of that or get involved with it in any manner. Everything that I say about the Klan and being an honorable police and resistance organization only applies to that original Klan, 1867 to 1977. But most people, when they hear the mention of the Klan, there's been, there's been so much indoctrination that everybody considers everything about the Klan, as being evil and that type of thing. But the Klan protected the ladies of the South, and they from fates worse than death. But that that includes everything that I had to say about it today. So that's all. We can go to the plantation house and enjoy a wonderful meal.